This is an example of storytelling, from what the authors call academic research, which would not be publishable under the scientific method of research. It bears a striking resemblance to a Soviet-era tool, used in universities called active measures, aktivní meropриятия, or the Great Brainwashing Device, which compels young people in universities and across social media what to think, instead of how to think. Unlike the scientific method, the method used in our critical race theory paper does not require a proof, or a disproof, and offers a backdoor for political propaganda to be used in a conclusion. Let's compare the steps of the scientific method, which are observation, question, hypothesis and method, experiment, and conclusion, to the steps used in our critical race theory paper. The paper we are looking at is called Operationalizing Critical Race Theory in the Marketplace. It was published in 2021 in the Journal of Public Policy and Marketing, with 7 citations according to Google Scholar at the time of publishing this video. The observations used in this paper are based on assumptions. For example, stating that the idea of race is not studied enough in marketing, which is an opinion, not an observation. Stating that race operates insidiously, which is an opinion, not an observation. Stating that race forms an ideological underpinning of a marketplace, which is an opinion, not an observation. The paper does not ask a clear question about whether critical race theory is a beneficial way of understanding consumer behavior. Instead, the paper forms an argument to push the adoption of critical race theory in the marketing community as a way of identifying consumer behavior by race. Without a hypothesis, the method is argumentation to build a case for introducing critical race theory into marketing practices. For example, stating that researchers are exposing widespread racial discrimination on digital platforms like Facebook, Craigslist, Uber, and Airbnb, with no citation or evidence. Stating that research reveals how race marginalizes and materially disadvantages people of color, with no citation or evidence. Stating that this demonstrates the persistence of race as an integral aspect of marketplace actions, with no citation or evidence. Stating that increased efforts to tackle structural anti-blackness is arguably shaping marketplace and public policy activity, with no citation or evidence. Stating that there is limited scholarship that focuses on race in top-ranked marketing journals, with no evidence that critical race theory will have a good impact on consumers. Stating that there had been a decline in publications focused on black consumers in top marketing journals since the 1970s, with no evidence that critical race theory will have a good impact on consumers. Stating that marketing propagates scholarship that insufficiently engages with race or wholly neglects it, with no evidence that critical race theory will have a good impact on consumers. Stating that power, privilege, and oppression need to be addressed to challenge structural racial inequalities and improve consumer well-being, with no evidence that critical race theory will have a good impact on consumers. Stating that it is vital that the role of race is made explicit when examining its dynamics in the marketplace, with no evidence that critical race theory will have a good impact on consumers. The method used by the paper to introduce critical race theory to the marketing community comprises, first, a discussion on critical theory in marketplace studies, with no measurement-based testing. Second, a discussion on the overlap between critical theory and critical race theory, with no measurement-based testing. Third, a discussion on the contributions and limitations of critical theory to marketplace studies, with no measurement-based testing. Fourth, a discussion on operationalizing critical race theory, to demonstrate its relevance to transformative consumer research, with no measurement-based testing. Fifth, a discussion on the core tenets of critical race theory, to highlight its potential as a robust analytical tool in marketplace studies, with no measurement-based testing. This method would not be supported under the scientific method of research, because it declares the result in the method, instead of allowing the result to emerge as a byproduct of the method. This implies that, if there was a hypothesis, it would not be falsifiable. For comparison purposes, we can look at the discussion and literature reviews in terms of the experiment under the scientific method, with the following observations. Stating that marketplaces are inherently political, with social and structural relations that connect to inequalities, including ethnicity, race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, and physical ability. Which is an opinion, with a deceptive and non-rigorous citation. Stating that there is a long history in which the marketplace has been termed racist. Which is an opinion, with a non-rigorous citation, and no evidence. Stating that multicultural marketing theory addresses issues linked to race, ethnicity, and culture in the marketplace, with no explanation about the issues. Stating that a focus on multiculturalism or ethnicity is inadequate for investigating racism and white supremacy in the marketplace, with a non-rigorous citation, no explanation, and no evidence. Stating that a focus on racialization will help to address market-based racial inequities as part of a social justice effort to recognize what people of color experience. Which is an opinion, with a non-rigorous citation, and no evidence. Stating that this approach is attuned to how transformative consumer research welcomes challenges to established perspectives and seeks to enhance consumer well-being by tackling some of the more difficult and intractable social problems. Which is an opinion, with a non-rigorous citation of 6 pages, that only describes racial sampling once, as being difficult, and makes no mention of it in its conclusion. Stating that an approach that focuses on racism and oppression in the marketplace can highlight issues concerning white supremacy and colonial legacies rarely found in marketing literature. With no citation, no information on the issues, and no evidence that there are issues. Stating that critical race theory has a commitment to a social justice agenda that struggles to eliminate racial, gender, language, generation, status, and class subordination. With an incorrect citation and no evidence. The citation should be Matsuda 1996. Stating that social justice is used to signify fairness and equity in distributions, procedures, and interactions related to marketing scholarship. Which uses the incorrect citation to manipulate marketing practices. Stating that research links racially targeted food marketing to negative consumer outcomes. With either an incorrect citation or a misrepresentation of the citation. Stating that this research has an unstated function of addressing market failures and provides companies with a moral compass to correct this and respond through positive marketing. Which is either a conclusion from the incorrect citation or a conclusion drawn from the misrepresented citation. Stating that corporations are continually apologizing for racist behaviors. With no page reference in a book citation. Stating that critical race theory recognizes the enduring pervasiveness of racism from individual private thoughts. With no citation and no explanation of these thoughts. Stating that racism is a state of mind embedded in our psyches, culture, systems, and institutions. Which is an opinion, with no citation or evidence. Stating that racism and racialized incidents are experiences that affect all members of a society, regardless of racial affiliation or identification. Which is an opinion, with no citation or evidence. Stating that the practice of redlining, the systematic denial or limiting of products and services to residents of a particular area based on race or ethnicity, is more likely to negatively affect the lives of people of color. With a citation which outlines a method for testing a hypothesis without testing the hypothesis. Stating that critical race theory recognizes citations as being a political part of academia, which is steeped in histories of racism that have resulted in epistemic erasures of marginalized knowledge and research. With an unrigorous citation and no evidence. stating that, for many years, people of color have been relegated to the ethnic aisle for some products, also stating that the word ethnic perpetuates racist ideologies, which is an opinion, and does not consider the idea that people of color could be, instead, promoted to the ethnic aisle. Stating that the color of offerings for products such as bandages, pantyhose, and ballet shoes have typically corresponded to those racialized as white, further normalizing whiteness and leaving non-white consumers without viable options, with a non-rigorous citation and no geoethnic data for evidence. Stating that critical race theory uses lived experiences for knowledge production, and that in marketing, several methods use perspectives from lived experiences for knowledge production, but the scholarship remains inaccessible to consumers. With 14 citations, all of which are accessible to consumers, and all of which are non-rigorous. Stating that critical race theory should not be conceptualized as a standalone theory that highlights the role of race in society, with no evidence that critical race theory will have a good impact on consumers. Stating that diverse approaches enable rigorous analysis of the interdependency of racism and capitalism, with no rigorous citations and no rigorous evidence. Stating that the paper contributes to marketing studies and extends legal, education, sociology, and media studies, without describing how it contributes to marketing studies, or how it extends legal, education, sociology, and media studies. Stating that, for an interdisciplinary approach to critical race theory, there is no one answer, one discipline, or one path, but using all of the tools in the toolbox is encouraged. Which took a half page of the paper to say, with no evidence that critical race theory will have a good impact on consumers. Stating that an overlapped approach to critical race theory requires the analysis of interdependence of identity coordinates and findings that more closely illustrate the lived experience of consumers, with a non-rigorous citation and no mathematical model to describe the approach. Stating that, to further illustrate the value of using a critical race theory lens to explore marketplace actions and protocol, the paper applies critical race theory to the development and utilization of facial recognition technology, without applying critical race theory to the development and utilization of facial recognition technology. Stating that a person of color's existence often goes unacknowledged when misidentified as non-human, which speaks to their invisibility and socio-historical experience in marketplaces of dehumanization, which is an opinion with no citation, no data, no context, and no evidence. Stating that there is a continued insistence that artificial intelligence is unbiased, despite biases that result in disparate outcomes for people of color, which indicates refusal to acknowledge lived experience, and is therefore an intentional ignorance, which is an opinion with no citation, no data, no context, and no evidence, and is therefore an intentional ignorance. Stating that the lived experience of people of color is not used as an input for AI-based facial recognition, with no reference or explanation on how lived experience can be used as an input for AI-based facial recognition. The section on artificial intelligence does not discuss, cite, or acknowledge how biases in machine learning are a central problem for AI technology, with nearly everything the technology has been pointed at, and therefore not just unique to human characteristics. While the discussion in the paper acts as a proxy for experiment using the scientific method, it would not stand up to scientific scrutiny or be publishable. It relies on a very small amount of third-party data and stories, with insufficient information about the samples, no data modeling, unrigorous citations, opinions as citations, incorrect citations, misinterpreted citations, citation frequencies which are completely inconsistent, repeated introduction of new methods in the discussion, and has not proved or disproved anything. Therefore, it would not be used to reach a conclusion that would hold any academic significance in the sciences. From an ethical perspective, it does not illuminate any discussion about whether critical race theory would have an unbiased impact on all consumers.